Well, after the latest performance for the Bruins against Penn State, the biggest question is, when both quarterbacks are healthy, who's QB1? My answer? It's going to tick you off.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxheimer. Thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And where we get started today is our usual Monday episode, reacting, grading the team's performance. And this is a unique performance, right? Because there's a lot of differing factors for this UCLA team. You had a new quarterback. We didn't know who was going to start all week. It was, at the end, Justyn Martin, and DeShaun Foster said post-game, Garbers tried to go, and that's why he was questionable, and I held him out, which led the youngster Justyn Martin to start, although he's been in the program 3 years. First time under a new system. Then you had a new center. All right, you're without Rico Flores. You had no Titus Mokiao-Atumalala. Nothing to J. Michael Sturdivant. So basically your three receivers were either a non-factor or not playing. On the road, in one of the toughest environments in college football, one of the better defenses in college football, that is designed to stuff the run and eat up a terrible pass protection. And how did UCLA do? Well, the big thing is, now it's the debate, right? Do you want to start Justyn Martin going forward or Ethan Garbers? All right? Do we plan for the future with more years of eligibility left with Martin? Or do you go with the starting senior quarterback who's waited so long, transferred from Washington, waited behind DPTR, won the job, lost the job to Dante Moore, and then won it again to be the clear-cut starter heading into 24? And is he going to lose it again to a 6'4" youngster and Justyn Martin? Let's go over the numbers real quick. All right. Ethan Garbers over the season so far this year, 57% completion rate, all right? 6 picks, 3 touchdowns, along with a 53-yarder, 202 yards per game. That's Garbers in this new West Coast offense. All right, Justyn Martin, over 3 games, has a 68% completion percentage, 179 yards and a touchdown. Also, ironically, both quarterbacks had a long with a 53-yard pass. Let's look at Justyn Martin's game from this week. 22 of 30, 167 yards passing, a touchdown, a QBR of nearly 83, fairly similar to that of Drew Aller on the Penn State sideline. So you could say the quarterback play wasn't that far off. He did not turn it over. He's a little more mobile, especially as the healthier quarterback than Garbers. So why am I going to sit here and tick you off and say that I think UCLA should keep Ethan Garbers as the starting quarterback when he's healthy? Yeah, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but tell me this, and I don't think you should be able to disagree with me here. This is almost similar to last year. Just insert the name Dante Moore with Ethan Garbers. The problem is this is a more complicated offense. Garbers is a year older, and he has already dealt with this situation before, questioning his starter status. There is a reason why Garbers was the unquestioned starter this year, and there is also a reason why he was one of 3 quarterbacks last year and ended up earning the starting nod to begin the year and ended with the starting nod. It helped UCLA win a bowl game last year as the much better starting option compared to the Dante Moores and the Colin Schlees of the world. They're talented young men that will be on to bright futures, possibly Dante Moore at the likes of Oregon. But there's a reason why UCLA had a clear-cut starter in Garbers. Now, the question is, did Martin benefit from what could be an oversimplification of the offense? All right. Yeah, UCLA is averaging 14 points a game. They faced 4 straight ranked opponents, teams that have gone on the road, gone at home, and dominated teams from Indiana. Yes, crazy to say it's Indiana, but Indiana is one of those teams. LSU on the road, Oregon at home, Penn State on the road. And yes, Justyn Martin went down the field. UCLA probably should have points on their opening drive. That's a DeShaun Foster decision. But again, 3 points was not going to win that game, although it could have swung the momentum early on in the game. UCLA had a much better rushing attack. If you take away the negative runs and negative yardage attributed to Justyn Martin, UCLA had a positive running game. All right. But I still think Garbers, maybe if you run a simplified offense where you hit the guys in the slot, you hit your tight ends, UCLA's leading receivers, where TJ Harden, although his long catch for 53 yards running up the sideline held him to be the leading receiver. Logan Loya back in the foray with the injury to Rico Flores Jr. I'm not saying Justyn Martin did a bad job and should not be in conversation for the starting quarterback spot. It just makes me a little less worried for next year, where if we're worrying about a commitment from Madden Imealeava, that's not the stage of this moment, but if we're worried about him being ready week 1 in 2025, if Bieniemy is still the coordinator, and still might be, he's got a 2-year deal, then I trust the guy who's been in the system for a full year like Martin. So if I'm wondering about the future of quarterback, I'm not afraid, as I necessarily was, leaning towards a true freshman next year. All right? Because right now, the quarterbacks are Garbers, Martin, and everybody else. And the next year, it'll be Martin and Madden battling for a starting spot. And that's if one of them doesn't flip a commitment, if more NIL deals come elsewhere, or if Martin decides to transfer, which everybody's been yapping about forever. Okay? So you look at this performance, I was impressed. I liked what he did. Yes, he didn't become a college football legend by starting the game and winning the game, all right? Short of finding out a way to win this game on the road to Penn State, or UCLA putting up closer to 20 points in offense, which, yes, they couldn't get in the end zone, which they could have done earlier. Twice they were stuffed deep into Penn State territory. You add on 6 points for 2 field goals. Maybe they got 17 points. You add in a touchdown to field goal, they probably scored 21 points, other than the garbage time touchdown they ended up scoring against Penn State. Either way, Martin did enough to ease any concerns about the talent underneath Garbers. But I still think the guy who's been working, the leader in the locker room, should still keep his job when he is healthy. Now the question is if and when that is, and when to trust the offensive line, because if Garbers is not as mobile as the likes of Martin, and those long strides, I wish Martin would have ran more in this game against Penn State. We saw him tiptoe up the sideline and get first down yardage on a run. I'm not sure he was going to get a first down later in the game. There was a 4th and short. They got stuffed on a shotgun snap. Why not have him sneak it and reach over with his long arms, his long wingspan, and get a first down? Or a little zone read, little boom, option play. He goes outside and gets a first down. Showcase that early. I think there might have been a directive, let's not injure our backup quarterback, considering our starter's hurt, looking a bit banged up. We're not going to put Martin into harm's way. I'm fairly confident that that was the directive for Martin and his limited running scheme, right? His first start on the road in front of hundreds of thousands of fans in top 7, top 5 team in Penn State, who is right now in the fast track to being in the Big Ten championship game with Oregon and Ohio State about to play this week. Penn State's still going, and they're going to host Ohio State later in the year. Now, did Justyn Martin do anything to say he shouldn't be the starter? No. But I do think if you look to last year and you wonder, hey, we just dealt with this. And I was a firm advocate of going with the youngster then in Dante Moore, and it backfired. Ended up transferring. Chip Kelly left, couldn't be committal. Are we sure we really want that in DeShaun Foster's first year? Let it play out. Let Garbers get healthy. Know that, hey, I'm confident that they can do a solid game plan against Minnesota if Martin's out there or Garbers, but I would like Garbers to keep his starting job. And I was on the record last year saying, don't start Garbers until it was clear, oh, well, maybe Garbers is the more seasoned guy compared to Moore. And Martin doesn't throw as good of a ball, in my perspective, as Moore does. But he is he can move around the pocket, showcase some good short reads, and didn't make any mistakes. At this point, the most glaring thing looking on Garbers' resume, I've already stated it, and I'll say it again for the Justyn Martin camp here, listening, watching, the 6 picks in 4 games for Garbers to 0 in a starting opportunity for Martin where he really didn't throw the ball in harm's way. Now, some of those Garbers has had to force things with UCLA trailing. 2 of those picks I would attribute to the UCLA trailing games having to force it, 4th down, or you're down 2 scores in the 4th. Okay, but that's still 4 interceptions, not including the fumble or 2 in this game. And Martin did a nice job managing the game. And so far in his limited appearances, has a better quarterback rating than Ethan Garbers does. Overall in this game, the offense is going to get a D plus to a C minus. All right, they're facing a stout defensive front that wrecked the Illinois, offensive line, and they did similar things to UCLA: tackles for loss, a couple of sacks here and there. But I like what they did with the game plan. But again, you have to score more than 11 points to really improve upon what is one of the worst offenses in the country at this moment statistically. You can't average 14 points a game and start expecting A, B grades. A high for this game would be a C minus, considering the opponent, the circumstances, the offensive line being switched around with Prongos on one side, Carlin moving, yet a new center. Think about all those things and how many times it looked like Martin was stepping and slamming his foot down to get the snap, and it seemed like Yoon couldn't hear him. All right? But I thought they managed okay. And I know UCLA, we're a negative fan base to begin with. Like, there's no football is a negative Nancy fan base, right? Filled with negativity. Whether it's fire DeShaun Foster, fire the AD, yes, I'm very frustrated with how the season has gone. And I'm happy with how Martin played. We can both be sad that they lost and proud of their efforts. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So let's talk about special teams and, most importantly, the defense moving forward for an offense that I think deserves a D plus grade, maybe a C minus considering the circumstances. Context, it's a big clue, a big keep for this season. Let's talk about the rest of it next on Locked On UCLA. Let's talk about LinkedIn jobs, because when you're hiring for a small business and you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, you should check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and free, because it's not just another job board. It helps you hire those professionals you can't find anywhere else, even if you're not actively looking for a new job. It'll help you find somebody who's looking for a perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, over 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Cruising on here in Locked On UCLA, second segment. Once again, sitting back, digesting a couple of days after that UCLA Penn State game, which was not as ugly as it was predicted to be. The fourth straight game UCLA's been an underdog. The third straight, what was supposed to be the gauntlet, expanded though, with Indiana currently undefeated, looking for a strong season, and UCLA's string of 3 ranked opponents has stretched out to 4 with their home opener now as we wait for the Minnesota game. So what do I think? This is a UCLA game where they were underdogs by close to 4 touchdowns, and they covered against both Oregon, covered against LSU on the road, and they covered against Penn State on the road. Now you could say that those were early kicks, hot weather, early morning games for Penn State and LSU, where they just weren't really wanting to beat the brakes off the Bruins. Okay, well, I have to applaud UCLA in a stretch where we all expected, generally everybody in the schedule, UCLA could and probably would not challenge these teams in any of these games. Like, if you're drawing preseason schedule predictions, at best, the Bruins might have nabbed one of these games and probably would have lost all 3 of these games. Even in a season where UCLA, if they could have been better, those are probably most likely 3 losses on the schedule. So let's remember, even with a Chip Kelly-like coach team, they probably would have scored more points, all those things. Still, most likely a loss at Penn State, a loss at home to Oregon, and then a loss at LSU, although that was winnable. This game was competitive for a lot more the first half than many expected. And how is that the case? It's because the defense did not allow an opening touchdown, an opening possession touchdown, for the first time all season, and that was in UCLA's 5th game of the year. All right, some circumstances. Yes, Hawaii, they blew the punt coverage. The other games, those teams went right down the field, converted third downs, maybe didn't face a third down, and scored in the face of non-adversity. This game, UCLA gave up a 5-yard run, Then for some reason, Penn State decided to pass it twice, and the Bruins ate it up. Actually ate up the first couple of drives, and surprise, surprise, how many more games UCLA could have been competitive in deeper into the third quarter if they did not give up a touchdown on the opening drive. And UCLA should have been the team that scored first in this game. They had the much better opening drive, the better script. They got stuffed instead of taking the points. Even the big noon kickoff crew was a little frustrated that they didn't take the points earlier. You know, I'm aggressive. I'm the Madden NCAA Football 14/24 crew guru that's like, all right, maybe you go for it. But in reality, you take the points. But still, you look at the defense, they played much better. Now, I have my reservations about Aller, but he did complete a decent percentage of his passes, greater average 10 yards per pass completion compared to Justyn Martin. Threw a pick, had a QBR close to 92. And Penn State, without their top running back in Singleton, still ran the ball with Katron Allen for 78 yards and converted on big plays. They went down the field for close to 8 minutes on a touchdown drive. They showcased how to manipulate the 2-minute drive, facing third down in their own part of the field. James Franklin's like, let's milk this clock to the 2-minute warning. And in 20 seconds, they're first and goal at the UCLA 5. So while as good as the UCLA defense I thought they played, it's still no better than maybe a C- to D+ performance as well. But again, I said UCLA's defense, I'm going to give them a much better grade for not giving up an opening drive touchdown. And finally they did. So they earn a C-. Now, what did the Bruins do correctly on defense? Well, they did not get gashed on the run. They did get a sack. Their first sack since week 1. So remember, weeks 2, 3, 4, or games 2, 3, and 4, because they don't coincide with the weeks at this moment, UCLA got a sack. They had not had one forever. That was Femi Oladejo, who was my defensive player of the game if you combine it with Schlesinger. All right? He has had a great day. Just like last year, it was Kane Madrano's real breakout. This year, it's been Carson Schlesinger, who has had 15 tackles, 6 solo, half tackle for loss. He was a 1B to Femi Oladejo, who was getting praised in the broadcast over and over again, had easily his best day rushing off the edge. 10 tackles, 5 solo tackles, a sack, and 2 tackles for loss. That was a great performance. It was nice to see Cajo back in the lineup after missing the last couple of games. Madrano obviously was out there, but what UCLA missed was some good coverage, leaving some guys wide open in the middle of the field deep in the secondary. Sucks. Cool. I know UCLA also had a pick taken off the board, so that's another thing. When UCLA was still very much in the game and they had a pick and could have had much shorter field position, it was taken off the board with what I think Joe Klatt said was a terrible call by the official on holding. I thought there might have been a little bit of a hold, so I wasn't talking about Homer officiating. Yet, if he felt so strongly about it, yes, it did not necessarily change the outcome, but it could have changed how he felt and how close the final score ended up being. 27-11 with UCLA getting that garbage time touchdown and 2-point conversion, where they were still going to cover without the touchdown anyway. So the defense gets, a good, solid C- for what was getting a sack for the first time in a few weeks since week 1, forcing what we thought to be a turnover and a terrible overthrow, and yet UCLA had good coverage, bracketed there, the safety over the top, the corner keeping him there, or maybe it's Addison, the safety staying there anyways. UCLA, I thought they did decent defensively. They did not get overly gashed by the run. It was 85 yards on the ground. Now, they did let Drew Allard throw for 237 yards. Not an eye-popping total, but more than I thought UCLA should and would have allowed against a team that prides themselves on being able to run the football. Now, they can go a little more vertical with their new offensive coordinator. They did some funky things, right? As they had the offensive linemen run in motion and knock UCLA on their rear end. But the Bruins ended up doing what they needed to do defensively until they could, because they can't get in the backfield consistently. C- performance. More points I would have liked Penn State to score. But again, remember, they took the pick off the board. I don't like the penalties in this game, although it wasn't as many as I probably thought UCLA in this game. penalties, 5 for 45 yards. Felt like more, but when you're facing a team that has 2 penalties for 20 yards, and unfortunately one of those penalties takes a pick off the board, you're going to have to play a little bit better. UCLA had more possession time in this game. Their touchdown drive of almost 9 minutes late in the game was nice. I wish we could have seen a lot more from Keegan Jones, because Chip Kelly and Eric Bieniemy refused to use him, right? When you got a running back coordinator, you have a running back as your offensive coordinator, and you got a running back as a head coach, I just don't know why they don't use Keegan Jones as much, all right? I just do not understand it, and I'm not sure we have either. I know he's finally been the guy to return kickoffs, and the kickoff return looks better. I don't know if much better is the word, because kickoffs have been less and less important to the game of football in recent years. But why don't we use Keegan Jones, man? Like, what are we doing? All right, special teams, they made the field goal. Cool. Covered a punt. All right. They get a decent grade because they've been the best unit of UCLA all year when they had struggled in years prior. I like what Brian Norwood's done with the group, with Richter stealing the punting job after a great job in LSU, pinning them deep. I think UCLA's had good, and Bagani obviously didn't miss the close kick. So, better than expected for UCLA with a new center, new quarterback, without 3 receivers. Yes, J. Michael Servant was there and did play, but had nothing and no targets. No Titus Mokiala-Tumalala, no Rico Flores, who, despite playing 1 less game, is still UCLA's leading receiver. That's what the Bruins had. And again, maybe you could point back to segment 1 and advocate, well, if Martin did all this without his top players, then what are you saying, Zach? Well, I'd say you got a good point there. But there's a reason why he didn't win the starting job out of camp. And while I'm all good for a change, I do think a healthy Garbers needs a decent fair shake of it. All right. But I'm not saying Martin played bad, nor the defense. I liked what I saw. It obviously is just not good enough to go beat a top 5 team on the road at Beaver Stadium. It just isn't. Now, is patience key? We'll talk more about the Minnesota games and the rest of the Big Ten next on Locked On UCLA. All right. Maybe you're sitting there trying to get tickets to the postseason, right? You got postseason games coming up. There's the UCLA game at Minnesota, playing against Minnesota at home. Game Time is your place to go to get your tickets, all right? Because you can use the Game Time picks. It's a new feature. It curates to help you save more on upcoming sporting events like, hey, Dodgers fans, postseason games. Hopefully they got more to go. Maybe you'll go down to San Diego. UCLA at the Rose Bowl against Minnesota. Concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Check out the Game Times picks. And you can know where your seat views are with panoramic views in the seat you'll be sitting in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, here we go. Wrapping up Locked On UCLA today, as we always do on Mondays. It's our Around the Big Ten segment. So the Bruins, they face off against Minnesota. And why is that of importance here in Week 7? Because in Week 6, they got one of their biggest wins in program history if you take away their stretch of poll championships early in the days of college football. So what happened in the college football day and age? Well, Oregon, they dominated Michigan State at the half, much better than what UCLA could have handled technically scoreboard-wise. But Oregon on a Friday night game, 31-10, where they could have looked ahead to the Ohio State game, which should have all the glitz and the glamour and eyeballs on a Saturday afternoon at 4:30 in the Big Ten on NBC, right? That's going to be the big game. Number 2, number 3 team in the country, duking it out. The top dogs expected to be in the Big Ten, and Oregon, they just didn't. They dominated Michigan State. I caught glimpses of the game live. It was fun to see Oregon dominate this game on the scoreboard early. Yes, Dylan Gabriel did make a mistake or two, just like UCLA capitalized on an Oregon mistake to keep the game much closer at the half and interesting heading into the third. Michigan State did not have the same fate, trailing 24-0 heading into the fourth. But for a team that's 3-2 and 1-2 in Big Ten play, Sparty, well, the scoreboard read the same, margin of victory for Oregon at home over Michigan State compared to the Bruins at the Rose Bowl. So I wonder how that UCLA-Michigan State game, theoretically would go. I don't know. Oregon still dominated. They did what they needed to do. And Jordan James, 166 yards on the ground. Brutal. All right. Ohio State and Iowa. Well, you figured Iowa probably wouldn't score many points. You thought Ohio State would be kept much lower than expected. This was 7-0 at the break, and Ohio State's been going tough to score in the first quarter. They've been starting slow out of the gates. And it was 7-0 heading to the third before they blew it wide open. 3 touchdowns, 28-0 into the fourth. Ended up winning 35-7 in this game. And I wonder what UCLA, a team when they host Iowa, they don't get Ohio State or Michigan this year in an 18-team Big Ten and only 9 games on the conference schedule. So many teams you miss. UCLA is going to have their hands full offensively when they play Iowa at home. Now, I think the defense can have a good day. And if the Bruins muster up enough offense, they could easily upset Iowa at home, which Iowa will be favored on November 8th when they come to town. I know nobody's ready for that type of positive talk yet. But UCLA, I don't think will finish this season with 1 win. I hope they don't. That would suck. I don't want Spencer of Locked On College Football to be right with his worst-case scenario. But at the moment, that's where it's trending. But I do think, and I thought UCLA had a winnable game against Minnesota coming up, who just played at Michigan, kept it competitive with a very strong fourth-quarter surge and a debatable onside kick. Followed that up with a 4th-and-goal conversion to score a late touchdown less than a minute left to beat USC 24-17, who went from ranked in the 11th spot in these polls to out of the top 25 entirely, which I think hopefully gives me more confidence for that UCLA SC game in terms of it won't be embarrassing. I think it should be more fun in the Rose Bowl later in the season. We will talk UCLA SC later, always fun when they lose. I did not think Minnesota would beat them, but for a team that got their first Big Ten win, a lot of these teams, when you look at the ones who are making the cross-country flights, other than, say, Indiana to UCLA, a lot of these teams are losing, right? USC's lost to Michigan and at Minnesota. Wisconsin came to USC and lost. You looked at the Washington-Michigan game. Michigan was number 10, and Washington won this game by 10. Yes, Michigan was up 17-14 heading into the fourth, but at the end of the game, the tire, everything bears down. Michigan can't throw the football. Washington went up, and they won the game by 10. And some people were thinking there's no way Washington should have been favored in this game. And they were, and upset a number 10 Michigan team who was one-dimensional for a Washington team that really choked losing to Rutgers on the road the week prior. So I wonder what that November 15th game for UCLA is going to look like when they play at Washington on a Friday night in Seattle. Looks like Jed Fish is getting it ready over there. So I think Washington, in a worst-case scenario, when UCLA plays them later in the season, we've seen them cough up a game to Rutgers, who seemingly was a fraudulent, unbeaten team. I'm not saying UCLA is going to have their way with them when they go to New Jersey later in the year, but I do think if Washington plays down to UCLA, it's possible on November 15th in Seattle. But when you knock off a top 10 team in Michigan, you got to give the Huskies credit, and they did what they needed to do. They won by 10. That's a big win, and one I did not see coming. All right, Wisconsin, Purdue, 52-6. I think Purdue existing proves UCLA Hope is not the worst team in the Big Ten. Although a UCLA-Purdue game would be entertaining. Rutgers lost 14-7 to Nebraska. All right. So Nebraska, UCLA plays, I think, early November in Lincoln. They go to Rutgers. Those are 2 games where I'm wondering how the quarterback play goes. Defensively, they're looking sound at the moment. A true freshman quarterback for Nebraska. Rutgers, who thrives and wants to live with the running game and a new quarterback. I just wonder how that game's going to go for UCLA and Rutgers and Nebraska. Maybe they can steal one of those games. Those are both teams that are unbeaten, one of which was formerly ranked in Nebraska before their choked loss to Illinois, where Nebraska could still very well be 6-0 and 3-0 in Big Ten play. It wasn't a big week of games in Big Ten play, as I did forget to mention the Indiana game at Northwestern, 41-24, which was close late until the Hoosiers pulled away and again scored 40 points. So when they came to town and put 40 on UCLA, the Hoosiers have been doing that relentlessly, game in and game out. And I hope they do that to Ohio State later this year in Columbus. We'll find out. But good for the Hoosiers and Curt Cignetti. So what I thought was pretty much a quiet week in Big Ten play, other than obviously the stunner from USC losing to Minnesota, one of the big weeks in college football where so many upsets happened, and even Miami miraculously coming back with Cal choking that game away late. And I heard that, I guess I didn't pay attention to it, but obviously you blow 25 points, maybe a little officials calls, maybe everything else, who knows. A wild week in college football, and I think that's why also, as UCLA fans, we're so frustrated. You saw so many top 11 teams. Another one that should have gone down was trailing 25 on the road to the other UC school. And where's UCLA sitting at? Yes, I hear your frustration. I'm with you guys. And a team with a new coach, a new coordinator, two new coordinators, technically a new quarterback because he didn't start the majority of the year last year. What are we doing? Yes, it was frustrating. Couldn't one of these games been an upset or like a classic to the end where we were heartbroken, right? Sometimes we miss the heartbreak. And at the moment, UCLA is just not heartbroken. They're just crushed. I do think over the course of the year, we can give this team a little more time. We'll learn a lot about the Minnesota game, all right? If Minnesota is light years ahead of UCLA, then yes, it is frustrating, and a win-win season is certainly in the cards. Even though Minnesota looks a little bit better than advertised, the same team that lost at home at the beginning of the year to a North Carolina team without their quarterback who got hurt, and that same North Carolina team got blown out by James Madison. So where is UCLA to go? They've got a string of winnable games and non-ranked opponents coming up, unranked opponents. This is where UCLA can make, this is where DeShaun Foster can quiet his critics going forward. And possibly Eric Bieniemy too, because they may not be one and the same. If UCLA is competitive and wins some of these games, that helps DeShaun Foster, but might not save Eric Bieniemy's job if this continues. Although he does hope, I would assume, 2 years would be a better chance to help this program understand the offense, right? If you look at UCLA and you look at Bieniemy had 1 year in Washington, 1 year at UCLA. How is that going to help the development of any quarterback? Changing systems year after year. It'd be the third year, third system, Chip Kelly, Bieniemy, and somebody else. But this is a chance to quiet some critics with their stretch. Minnesota looks a little stronger after competing with a potentially overrated Michigan team that runs the football with great defense. But again, we hope the travel hurts the Golden Gophers and the Bruins knock off one of the candidates for taking the UCLA job, which was PJ Fleck. I'm not sure how long he was a candidate. Brief moment, a name mentioned. I don't think the Bruins wanted him, ended up going with DeShaun Foster. But again, they're going to get up against what is, quote unquote, PJ Fleck says, the best 2-3 team in the country. Now, is that true? Maybe UCLA is the best 1-4 team in the country. I don't know. Now we're just throwing random things out there. But I want to believe in this UCLA team and more. Stay tuned for more Locked On UCLA content. We'll talk Minnesota coming up. We'll talk more UCLA basketball prospects. And, hey, we got UCLA basketball content as well. As I talked with Isaac Shade of Locked On College Basketball, we'll post that in the next couple of days for Locked On UCLA. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.